So in March of this year, we organized a very big networking event for the participants of the Global Technology Symposium. I'm just going to list a few achievements of ours, if you don't mind. In April, we hosted a delegation of the Russian IT directors who came to visit Silicon Valley, and as a result of that meeting, we have several participants in this room now participating in this conference. In April, Ambar organized the inauguration of the Russian Innovation Center, which was created in California by 3 large investment funds from Russia: Rosnano, RVK, Russian venture company, and Skolkovo Foundation. The top representatives of those funds came to Silicon Valley and spoke at that event. In May, we had a privilege to participate at the first Congress of the Russian CIO directors in Moscow. In June, Ambar organized a very well-attended event about the Russian leading internet search company Yandex, which recently went public and doing very well. In July, Ambar signed a cooperation agreement with the Tomsk region in Russia and organized a very lively debate on the risks and opportunities of doing business in Russia. And in September, we had a chance to visit Ukraine and represent Ambar at one of their most interesting events on entrepreneurship called Innovation Breakthrough. Anna Degtyaryova, who is the head of that organization, Innovation Breakthrough, is here right now. Okay, with us, and she will have a chance to speak about what's happening in Ukraine in terms of innovation and entrepreneurship tomorrow morning. And throughout this year, we actually have hosted multiple delegations coming from different regions of Eastern Europe. From the very beginning, Ambar's vision of SWOT has been to create a networking platform for connecting people interested in discussing technology, entrepreneurship, and investment. Now we're happy and proud to be a part of the current global innovation process that enables people in every part of the world to make use of their talents and skills. I'm not going to read the rest of this because we're really running late right now, but let me just express my wishes that this conference will serve as just another building block toward creating this vision. Welcome everybody for this conference, and enjoy yourself. If you have any questions about any logistical issues, please approach me or anybody who has this tag, organizer, and we will be happy to help you. And
hello to everybody. I am happy to be here, and it's a great honor for me to open Silicon Valley Open Doors. Silicon Valley does really open the doors to all necessary resources for high-tech companies, unique atmosphere and effective networking and ventures investments. But you should also look beyond California state. Silicon Valley opens the doors in the global world. Everything what was mentioned above is universal and available from here abroad. And this is the most important thing. Silicon Valley opens you the doors to any country you need in the world. Your project may be born in India, and you can find an advisor in Silicon Valley and establish your company in Israel, for example, if you are a clean tech company. And also a grant for development from Russia can be available as well. From your project's cradle, you should think what further opportunities to develop it, besides those obvious and well known to you, are offered in the global market. We know the examples when young companies move to Israel or Germany to develop their projects in a suitable environment. But with no exaggeration, Russia now offers by far the best conditions for high-tech companies on research and development stages today. Many of you know about Skolkovo project, and the special federal law in Russia determines its activities and benefits for the participants. Starting with outstanding tax facilities, Skolkovo is ready to fund startups for research and development purposes without pretending on any share in that companies. You can apply for grants up to $5 million and more to finalize your project before the sales start and use working space and laboratories on 400 hectares near Moscow if a project fits to one of the main directions maintained by Skolkovo: biomed, telecommunications, energy efficiency, nuclear technologies, and of course IT. The real estate will accommodate up to 20,000 employees. Skolkovo is the high-profile project, but not the only one in Russia. The concept of another major innovation center in Russia, Innopolis, defined as live, learn, work, and play. It will be located near the capital of Tatarstan Republic, Kazan city, and will occupy 1,200 hectares of the best land in the region. The center will be concentrated only on the development of innovative companies in information technology industry. To do so, the government of the Republic is going to create the infrastructure which will be comfortable not only for employers but also for employees, both from the regions of Russia and abroad. Employers will be granted to use non-standard business conditions as well as attract high-skilled human resources which will be grown up in new created IT University of Tatarstan. Employees will get not only comfortable working and living space, but also entertainment area for leisure time within Innopolis, as well as the golf course and popular ski resort located nearby. The population of Innopolis is supposed to be up to 50,000 people, including 20,000 IT specialists themselves. So why don't you settle your developers there? Pretty much similar projects are being developed now in other countries with emerging markets, and our goal is to know all of them and to find the best resources from different countries to use for the development of this or that startup. And with this approach, each startup can become a smart-up. So in the next couple of years, the world will get several new platforms for high-tech companies and you can easily consume their facilities, distributing all the resources of your company just around the world. So we can still do it from here, from Silicon Valley.
All right, folks, so we're going to get this started here. We're going to talk about a little bit about new technologies, new business models, and frankly, we were talking last night, and it's probably less of interest to us to tell you about new business models and new technologies. We're sort of interested in hearing from you what you're seeing as entrepreneurs out there. So, but we'll sort of keep it a lively discussion. What I'd like to do is introduce each of the panelists and have them self-introduce each other. And then we're going to go through a couple of topics sort of to set the stage. I'd like to keep this very interactive, so if you have any questions or comments that you'd like to ask during the presentation, feel free to do that. And then we'll sort of go one more round and then wrap it up. So anyway, with that, Bo, I'd like to start with you. If you can introduce yourself and tell us a little bit about what you're doing and how it your background, how it may reflect on this particular topic.
Okay, thanks, Peter. My name is Bo Parker. I'm the Managing Director for the Center for Technology and Innovation, which is a think tank within PricewaterhouseCoopers that has been exploring the future of information technology for about 20 years. We published something called the Technology Forecast, which is a quarterly journal that thematically looks at developing trends in information technology, mostly targeting enterprise use of technology, not so much consumer use. Another part of my role within the firm is to work with the part of our advisory function that advises governments and regions in how to develop the infrastructure to create an innovation and an entrepreneurial friendly environment. And so 2 years ago, I got involved in the Russian pursuit of an innovative economy in the Skolkovo developments with PwC Russia. Now I've been over to Russia 10 different times the last 2 years. Most recently, just a month ago, when I gave a talk at Digital October on developing trends.
Sam, how about you?
Sure. Good morning, everyone. My name is Sam Grocott. I'm the Vice President of Marketing for EMC Isilon Systems. Isilon Systems is a storage division within our parent company, which is EMC, the worldwide leader in enterprise storage. My relevant history that I think will be relevant for this group in this meeting is I helped start Isilon back in 2001. 10 years ago, I was employee number 7. I was the only one that didn't write code when I joined, so everybody else was an engineer, and I was the one marketing guy that they hired to say, hey, we're going to go build this really cool, scalable storage system that's going to solve some future challenges in the world. We need to go figure out how we're going to market that. So I joined about 6 months after the company was founded. We raised about $60 million in venture capital from Sequoia, Atlas, and Madrona Ventures over the first 6 years. Ultimately, we went public in 2006, raised about $100 million in the public markets, and then we were acquired for $2.5 billion last December from EMC. So I've got great experience from the earliest stages of a startup through today, still at that same company, and I hope to speak to some of the opportunities that we see from a technology, primarily within the enterprise data center space, and we'll talk a little bit more about this as we go forward.
So Art, how about yourself?
Thanks, Peter. Art Rydell. I've been at this game for a long time. Went to work as an engineer for my first startup in 1973. Spent most of my life on the operating side, including most recently CEO of several different companies over the years. But I've also had 2 stints in the venture capital business, one from 84 to 91 as a general partner of a venture fund back east, and then another several years from 03 through 05 up here on Sam Hill Road. I guess the badge says Band of Angels. I was an early member of the band when it got going in 1995 and have been an active member ever since. The band is 130 or so people these days who collaborate and do angel investing in mostly local technology-based companies. And let's see, I retired from my last CEO job at the end of last year, and my retirement now consists of being on 5 boards, 2 of which I'm chairing, and doing a handful of other things with other companies around here. And I'm pleased to be here as part of this panel today. Thank you.
And Art, we talked a little bit about this last night. I think a lot of folks here are from the IT sector, but you're also looking at healthcare deals, is that correct?
Yes, I've spent most of my life on the technology side, pretty broad-based, a wide variety of different avenues there. But I've also spent a couple of stints of my life, including starting a company that went public and being CEO for a few years after it was public of a life science information technology company. And within the Band of Angels, I've been fairly active on the medical devices, healthcare, life science side of things. And so, for example, one of the 5 boards that I'm on now is a medical devices startup. So I don't know if that's of interest to this audience, but I've got some measure of experience on the healthcare, life science, technology side.
I think we definitely should touch on that a bit later. So Slava, how about yourself?
Доброе утро. My name is Slava Kritov, and despite the fact that it says here that I'm with 5'9", I'm already moved on to another exciting opportunity to create private clouds for insurance and financial businesses for one of the portfolio companies of Oxygen Capital. That's the company that's chaired by the guys that I originally joined in '96 when I moved here to the US from an exciting job that I had with United Nations. And I joined a startup called Genesis. Some of you may have heard about it. It was at the time probably the biggest Russian IT company in the Valley with 800 Russian engineers. After we were acquired by Alcatel, built an infrastructure for application acceleration company, Netly, that was acquired by Akamai. And then I spent 5 exciting years working as Director of Technology Scouting for Symantec. I was buying startups for Symantec for a while and doing competitive differentiation analysis. Ultimately, this job led me to a number of advisorships into some startups, and one of them decided to convince me to join. So I built a couple of years I built infrastructure for call center as a service, startup called 5'9", and now back, completing the circle back with the same team that brought me over here. I'll be glad to discuss cloud technologies. If you have any questions, please feel free to talk to me.
Great. Well, why don't we start off? I think, Bo, you are involved in producing the tech forecast, and I think there are 4 or 5 topics there that you cover. Maybe as an initial sort of part of our discussion, maybe you can lay some groundwork here for some general sort of topic areas based on that report.
Thanks, Peter. Yes, my job is really doing research. I feel very fortunate because I get to do what I've been doing since I was a grad student many years ago. I just get paid a little bit better. The other fellows here on the panel, including you, Peter, you're active participants in creating the future. I research the future and try to write about what we think is going to happen. As part of our methodology, we talk to people like my friendly panelists here and try to converge that into a common view about what's coming next. But we also do broad surveys, and earlier this year we co-sponsored with, I think it was Cisco, AT&T, SAP, and ourselves, a global survey of business executives, not just CIOs and CTOs, but all walks of life, so to speak, across all sectors and around the world, and asked them a series of questions about where they expect to see the biggest impacts of technology on their enterprise. And specifically a question that was, of this list of 20 emerging technologies in technology areas, mark 3 that you think will have the biggest positive impact on your business over the next 5 years. So it's a very nice way to understand at least what business people expect new technology to do for them. It's certainly not the only source of ideas, but it's one. And the results of that were pretty compelling, because only 4 broad areas of technology development received as many as, I think, 10% of the votes. 60% of the respondents agreed that mobile technologies would have a very positive impact on their business over the next 5 years. 40% said analytics, another 40% said cloud technologies, and another 35% said social technologies. Nothing else, as I said, came up to as much as 10%. So that's I think a very good way to get into our discussion today, because it really says here are the broad areas of development, of technology that people expect to impact their business. And there are follow-up questions about where they expect to make big investments, what do they think, well, how is it going to actually impact their business? And I can talk a little bit about that, and also about our own forecasts about why we think some of these areas have enduring positive benefits for enterprises. So just starting with mobile. When we started our research in mobile about a year ago, frankly, I thought this is just about old people in large enterprises having to get used to young people wanting to bring their iPhones to work. And to a certain extent, that still is the way some companies think about this whole bring your own device and mobile technology trend. But under the covers, what we really discovered was that the rise of mobile computing as opposed to mobile messaging, which is what the iPhone really represents and the subsequent devices like that, is really a transformative event. And it's in an unusual way. The way we phrased it was it really brings this notion of cybernetics back into an enterprise context. So what do you mean by cybernetics? It's systems of systems that work together, and the sum is the whole is more to the sum of the parts. And mobile devices are becoming much more configurable, just the way humans are configurable. And the notion is that mobile technologies are allowing humans and devices to sort of configure themselves together and become more for an enterprise from a talent perspective than was possible before. For example, a company might hire their competitor's leading salesperson and bring them on board and expect wonderful things, not realizing that the way that salesperson was being so successful was that they were using an iPhone and Foursquare to keep track of where their leading sales targets were having a drink after work every day. And just happening to show up at the same place. And that's how they were being very successful. Now imagine that person gets hired into a company that has a hard and iron-fisted rule that all they can use is a BlackBerry and they can't customize or do anything with it. would you expect that salesperson to have as much success in that new context? Probably not. So we can go into mobile and talk amongst ourselves a little bit more about what that means. I think the other piece of it that's really important is what it leads to, which is sort of the consumerization of IT trend, which I think people have been engaging with, and some of you may actually be engaging with. And that's a nice stepping stone to sort of the second topic, which is cloud. Because a lot of times when you think about consumerization of IT, you really are thinking only about bring your own devices, or I want to bring my device and make it work on the local enterprise network. But there's a bigger picture here that consumerization suggests, and that is that the talent within organizations that is growing up and becoming management at this point has never known a period in which there weren't computers in their houses. And they really represent a new range of management expertise and management comfort with information technology. So another way of thinking of consumerization of IT and the cloud is it explains the explosion of interest within enterprises in software as a service, as an IT delivery model. If you actually look at where the current projections of where cloud computing is having its biggest impact by far, it's not infrastructure as a service, it's not platform as a service. It really is incredibly large amount in the software as a service area. And this is allowing managers of business units to bypass internal IT and get processes automated and information collected and managed without having to wait and get in line in a large central IT stack of work. The third topic here is analytics. And I think analytics as a service is another emerging trend that's consistent with what we've just talked about, consumerization of IT, cloud, software as a service. In fact, had a nice conversation with a startup by the name of MetaMarkets and Mark Driscoll, who runs that company. And he has a very interesting term around this whole topic, which he calls badass companies, which is business analytics delivered as a service. And he thinks that that's the way a lot of companies are going to get more and more value from the data they have as they become overwhelmed by the amount of data they have to deal with, the fact that it's unstructured, that they don't have the talent internally to manage the semantics and the interactions between different sources of data and get value from that. And finally, there's social. And when we first got into social technology, we anticipated the real value proposition is the one that's pretty much out there, which is things like Facebook.com/PWC, or just a different channel to market or a marketing approach. But when we looked under the covers there, what we discovered was an emerging theme around using social technologies as an alternative collaboration platform, an alternative to email and in particular, and the important role of the social graph as a way to mediate the information explosion or the collaboration demands explosion that most of us experience within large enterprises. Fending off all of those requests for our time, or fending off all the sources of information flowing at us, and making sure, much the way the Google PageRank algorithm works, make sure that the social side of our enterprise life ranks, if you will, the most important things that we should be engaging with at the top of our stack. And that we're seeing social technologies as being that mediation layer that mediates all of the demands on our time around the most important things we should focus on. So I'll stop with that. And,
Great. Well, but one question I had was, how are you seeing, do you believe that all these sort of new trends and new developments are they creating opportunities for entrepreneurs to develop businesses around it, or is it a hindrance?
I think they create huge amounts of opportunities. If just look within this, as an example would be the emerging voice user interface technology that Siri is introducing the world to on the iPhone 4S. Just to get very, very micro, to give you an example, there's a company that has focused very much on the microphone technology, in fact, 2 microphones, and all the firmware that's needed to allow a voice to be pulled out of the noise of a noise environment so that it's only the voice that's actually, the phone's only listening to your voice and responding to your voice through a voice user interface. That's a challenging technical problem, That's the kind of a problem that an OEM like Apple would want to find a source in the market for a solution to. And I think there's lots of little pieces of the mobile technology market in all of these markets that have literally hundreds, if not thousands, of small little problems that continue to bedevil the larger OEMs in finding solutions for.
So, Sam, you had mentioned, or rather, Bo, you didn't mention big data as part of this. So I'm wondering, is that part of sort of cloud or not? But would love to have Sam pick up on it. But
Yeah.
just curious, is big data sort of part of that equation that you mentioned?
Yeah, I didn't get too much into analytics. We're actually pulling our research together around analytics right now. And what seems to be emerging for us there as an insight is analytics as a technology development area has had a lot of little siloed pieces. Predictive analytics, big data, semantic technologies, in-memory, even sort of the more advanced visualization approaches for analytics that companies like Tableau have been promoting. And what we're starting to see right now, I think for the first time, is those are beginning to be seen as an arc. That you can actually stitch all of these together into a bigger piece, which big data is part of. And the emergent pattern or the emergent lesson from that arc is this notion of real time. But it goes beyond real-time operational analytics, and what we're seeing with things like visualization and in-memory is a more important concept for analytics, which is not being able to get to real-time answers, but to actually engage with data to generate real-time questions. Because questions are actually the most important thing. If you're not asking the right questions, all the great answers in the world won't do you any good. And things like visualization and in-memory that turn analytics processes from a 6 or a 10-hour process into a 1-minute process allow you to engage with questions. Because you can get the answer to that question relatively quickly, you can then look at the next question. So you can stitch questions together and get to these aha moments. And we think that's the arc that's coming out of all of these trends in analytics.
Right. So with that as a backdrop, Sam, if you can maybe provide a little context around big data analytics, what's happening there from your perspective?
Absolutely. So, I get asked a lot, what is big data? It's a very broad, vague term that means a lot of things to a lot of different people. Certainly with the customers that EMC Isilon sells into, big data is very relevant to them because essentially it's the lifeblood of their organizations. If you look at the types of users that are harnessing the power and extracting value ultimately from their information, these are organizations that are taking on some of the largest, most challenging issues in the world today, whether it's within the healthcare and life sciences space with genomic sequencing, medical imaging, DNA research, to the energy, oil and gas sectors where we're looking for new sources of next generation energy sources, to things like within the financial services, how are we doing predictive trending and predictive analysis around where the next bet or where the next challenge is going to be within the financial markets. And then certainly big data is benefiting outside of those more mission critical areas to the lighter side or the funner sides of certain application uses. For example, media entertainment is one of the largest big data users out there. Now, they're not solving world hunger with that, but they're bringing to market some of the latest generation, next generation animation, special effects, 3D, which requires a tremendous amount of compute and storage resources to bring to bear to bring those movies to the theater. And then certainly social, as you touched on. The knitting of all of the Twitters and Facebooks and the improvement and collaboration of communication across multi-format is creating a huge big data challenge in terms of how we understand the usage of these tools and how people are communicating, and therefore what additional services can we offer them as we go forward. So big data to me is really an opportunity. It's not necessarily a description of the data itself or analytics specifically. If you ask our users of our solutions, and EMC has both analytics and storage for big data, it's a question of how do I go get more big data? They view it as an opportunity. It's something that they want to run at and get more of, because at the end of the day, the big data is their competitive edge. It's how they differentiate against their competitors. The more big data they go get, the faster they can analyze data, the more data they can capture, the more competitively advantaged they are. I think a lot of times in enterprise IT, specifically right now, we're seeing big data positioned as almost a challenge in some cases, like hold back the big data. The tsunami of information is too much. It's increasing costs, complexity. It's creating all these challenges. I think what you'll see ultimately in enterprise is to have that more specific vertical view that I touched on earlier, that ultimately they need to harness and collect more of that big data and extract value. And then apply technology that we all are bringing to market to help simplify and reduce costs for big data. I think there are really two extremes within big data. The extremes that describe big data to me are capacity and analytics, so storage and analytics. From the storage standpoint, we really see petabyte scale as the new marker that helps encapsulate what a big data storage is. So petabyte scale is something that we see commonly out there. Many of our users today have many, many petabytes of storage of data that they're storing. And then the other extreme is the analytics side, which really results to time to market and time to results. And to your earlier point, the goal there, the extreme goal there is real time. Now, everything in between real time and petabyte scale is all about the big data IT challenges that we're seeing today and how IT is supporting those two ultimate goals: unlimited information and real-time results. So what does that mean to the IT infrastructure? They got to deploy solutions that are optimized for storing that information and that are optimized to deliver that information and accelerate results faster. So that's where you see the storage industry really evolving to bring to market more advanced, more scalable, both on performance and capacity, but a simpler architecture to store all this information that is flooding the enterprise data center today. And then they're also deploying new analytics tools. Companies like IBM with Netezza, certainly EMC with Greenplum. There's this huge underground movement with Hadoop and MapReduce, and how it's leveraging, collaborating across large-scale deployments of information to find results and to find answers faster. You're seeing the merging of compute and storage starting to come together now to help deliver a more scalable, faster time to results solution for our customers. So I do think for what you'll continue to see, and this is the very early days of this big data trend and movement, that I would argue is a great candidate for one of these new technology trains that is just leaving the station now, that I expect a lot of you and certainly everybody in the industry to really start to innovate around and help accelerate the time to results and the ability to cost effectively store this information. I think there's a ton of innovation to be had there that we can all take advantage of.
Great. So Bo, you had mentioned again, cloud is sort of being one big area that you're seeing. So Slava, I'm curious on your end, we talked about big data, and I'm wondering to what extent does cloud computing, how is that affecting small, medium-sized businesses? What's that doing in terms of their ability to focus on their core competencies? Can you comment on that a bit and maybe some of your experiences with these insurance companies?
Okay, so I think that one of the first cloud applications was something that many of you here may remember from old days in Russia, the accounting type stuff. I remember writing those applications myself in Fox Pro. That was a challenge. And the ADP, the payment system that processes the majority of the checks, was probably the first cloud type app that took industry by the storm. But the real question with regard to the cloud is the applications that are offering this type of value. The most value is allowing people to concentrate on their own core competencies. So right before I left Symantec, I wrote a report and put it on my CTO's desk. And the report was called Empty PC and Empty Data Center. In it, I argued that in 3 to 5 years, majority of data centers in small to medium businesses will be empty, meaning that most of the business applications, traditional financial or CRM, would move to software as a service, and the businesses therefore would concentrate on their own core competencies. So right after I wrote this report, I resigned from Symantec and went to run operations for Five9 up until recently, and I had one IT guy in a company of 300 people, and this guy's role was to manage passwords and buy laptops. At the same time, I had close to 40 people running operations, several hundred servers processing calls. So I do believe that the middle market, the market for applications, packaged applications for small to medium businesses is essentially falling down. There are going to be some holdovers, in particular large corporations that will run their own infrastructure and will run their own applications, but majority of standard business apps are going to dissipate into the cloud. Therefore, I don't believe that there is a big perspective in pursuing SMB as a packaged app. On the other hand, when you look at the value of the cloud that it brings, it basically allows you to integrate horizontally. And so you would use Salesforce.com for CRM and Salesforce automation, NetSuite for billing, Lead360 for lead management, Marketo for marketing analysis. And due to the fact that all of those platforms offer APIs for integration, you essentially create a virtual infrastructure for your company out of integrating between several services. So I think that there is a marked difference of this market in the US and the market in Russia. One of the major computer manufacturers, a year ago, they opened up a data center in Moscow in order to host cloud services. And they offered all kinds of virtual environments, etc. And over a year, this major manufacturer has been able to sell exactly 0 offers on the cloud in Russia, because it looks like this market, Russian market, is not at this point, with potential exception of advertisement and social services, is not open to the cloud delivery model at this time, as opposed to US, which is kind of already embraced it a few years ago already. So keep that in mind. The models are different, but what it brings is every time that I'm bringing people to Moscow or Kiev, I pull out the phone at the metro station, which is 200 meters below the ground, and I show them, hey, look, 4 bars. New York doesn't have it. Current BART station, if you are underground, your phone doesn't work. There is an advantage to being a late mover, because you can buy infrastructure, which is very modern. You can avoid a lot of mistakes that people had made. So I think that eventually when the business environment in Russia will change, people doing business in Russia actually will have a chance to implement great solutions, because they don't have to suffer from repeating everybody's mistakes.
Thanks, Slava. So I'd like to ask you all to sort of think about some questions. I want to ask Art a couple to point our discussion in a little different area, but in the meantime, if you can think of some questions, so we'll come back to you after Art speaks. So Art, one question I was curious about here, we've talked about these quote-unquote hot technologies and these directions that have been talked about for a while. What are some of the sort of contrarian areas? And a lot of times Silicon Valley leads by being contrarian, and all of a sudden this stuff that is hot today wasn't so hot, 4 or 5 years ago. So tell us a little bit about what you're seeing out there.
Okay, well, I'm happy to respond to that, Peter. I'd like to just briefly follow up on a remark that you made at the very beginning of your comments when you first went to the podium, and also, some things Bo talked about. And just, tell you that for those of you who are looking for the broad themes, and the areas that are emerging and important to go after and so forth, I have a tremendous amount of sympathy, and I wish you luck, but I think that's an exercise that's fraught with peril, with all due respect to, Bo and the good work that, he and his group do. I think what we can tell you is what are the areas that will get you a good reception when you go to Sand Hill Road or to other, sources of funding, because those are the areas that they believe are going to represent big markets and so forth. But it's notoriously difficult to get those things right. Someone in our conversation last night, mentioned that even if you get the basic idea right, the timing is a giant issue, and getting the timing right is a giant issue. Just as a quick example, we're here in the Computer History Museum. Intel has a wonderful section on their website. It's a history section. It's a history of semiconductor technology in general and of Intel in particular. And I urge everybody to take a look at Gordon Moore's original article, I think it was in 1960, when he first formulated Moore's Law and published it. And take a look at the things that he forecast and what he got right and what he didn't get right in terms of what was going to become of semiconductor technology in the future. So hopefully you guys are focused on opportunities kind of at a micro level where you see things. Again, Bo talked to some of this that are niche opportunities. And those are much easier to get right. If we're going to go after the broad themes, I sort of wish us all luck. And last point on that is that I think also if you look at the very great technology companies, more often than not, it's not the original idea that allows them to build a great business. And I don't care whether you're talking about Intel, where it wasn't the first idea, it was the second idea, or Microsoft, where it wasn't the first idea, it was the second idea, or believe it or not, Google. It wasn't the first idea. It wasn't the search engine that was the key innovation at Google. It was the second idea. It was the advertising engine that was really the key innovation. Okay, all that said, all those caveats issued, I've been, when you talk about things that are contrarian, I just tend to look at things that are kind of slow and steady over time. So it's not that I think they sort of go away and come back. It's that, we're distracted by different things, over time from some things that sort of keep on going. We're here in California, and the gold rush analogy is one that's commonly used. A way you could take a long shot at getting very, very rich was by prospecting and trying to find a gold mine. But a more sure way of making money was by selling picks and shovels to the gold miners. And many great fortunes were made that way. Or selling blue jeans to the gold miners. Levi Strauss and Company is a great San Francisco success story. Back to gold rush days, they simply sold blue jeans to the gold miners. So, I look at these broad things emerging, and I ask, and I think, Slava is probably focused on some of these things as well. What do these companies need, to enable them to do whatever, it is that they think that they're going to do? I tend to look at the infrastructure side. I tend to look at the applications that will allow those people to run their businesses effectively. And those things don't have the dramatic sea changes involved in them. They tend to, evolve on a much more evolutionary basis. I also, something I've spent a chunk of my life with recently is infrastructure for wireless communications. Slava mentioned, some of the advantages in Russia. I think the U.S. is actually backward in those regards. And, Russia's advanced, but there are other advanced countries. Japan, Korea, even China are very advanced in their deployment of wireless technologies. And, there, a lot of it's driven by the basic laws of physics. We're running out of spectrum. We're coding at the Shannon limit now with our, with the way we code these signals. So, what are we going to do to expand capacity? And, one of the buzzwords that's out there now is so-called het nets, heterogeneous networks. It's one of the few things that you can do responding to laws of physics that is actually available to allow you to expand capacity. So I tend to look at some of those kinds of things, which just, keep on chugging over time. Lastly, and then I'll pass the baton back to Peter. He earlier had said that he would like me to comment a little bit on life science and healthcare. This is an area that goes in and out of vogue on Sand Hill Road. I mean, I think, you've probably had some experience with this yourself, Peter, but, there used to be a lot of Sand Hill Road funds that did healthcare investing and technology investing, and, then technology gets hot and they kick out all their healthcare partners, then go and form their own funds. But it sort of keeps on chugging, and there are other issues you got to worry about. You got to worry about the regulatory environment. It's a big deal here in the U.S. The rest of the world has, largely worked that out, but the U.S. is in the throes of trying to figure out, what it's going to do with reimbursement and so forth. But people are getting older. People continue to have health problems. People don't want to have those health problems. Innovation is required. So that's another area that I tend to look at. And if there are questions from the audience, I'd be happy to respond to some of them. Anyway, that's a little bit of my perspective.
So, any questions out there? Don't see any now. All right. Well,
I'll. Over there, Peter.
Oh, there was.
There's a lot of talk about innovation in IT, and they say software is everything. But if you could comment on other areas such as, biotech, 3D printing, innovative manufacturing, that would be also great.
All right, could you repeat the last few words?
Yeah, so most of the talk is always about IT and software, but if you could cover other areas, sort of more tangible areas like biotech, industrial technologies, do you see any exciting innovation coming down the line there too?
I'll give you a very quick comment on biotech. It's an area I've only been very peripherally involved in. I've sold picks and shovels to biotech companies. I haven't developed the drugs with my own bare hands, so to speak. The problem with biotech is that it's an incredibly capital-intensive business. And so sort of the game in biotech, if you're trying to do it, with a small amount of money, is you try to develop something innovative and then very early on either partner with or license what you've come up with to a larger healthcare organization, larger drug company or other healthcare organization that will fund the rest of the ticket through commercialization, which can be several $100 million easily just to get regulatory approval in the U.S. for a new drug these days. And that's very, very tricky because if you try to license your development early, you don't get a very good deal typically. If you can manage to take it further down the road, you can get a lot better deal. I think some of those capital requirements are also coming to roost now with all the clean tech stuff, and people are discovering just how capital intensive all that is. So there's a reason, I think, why people like us tend to focus more on technology, where interestingly enough, in today's world, things are actually becoming, if anything, a little less capital intensive. With all the tools that are available now, you can really start a web company pretty much on a shoestring or a cloud-based company or whatever, as opposed to 20 years ago when it took a ton of money to buy, mainframes and, all kinds of stuff. So yes, there certainly is innovation in, some of those other areas, but I think one of the barriers there, unless you've got a lot of money behind you, is the capital requirements in some of those other areas.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to that, Art, is having been around the Valley for 30 years, I have noticed some very successful transitions of people from IT to biotech, primarily in the medical device area. I've just on airplane rides, I've sat next to guys who are CEOs of medical device companies who have mechanical engineering backgrounds and never took a biology course in their life, but managed to find a partner, somebody to work with, as they address aspects of the human body that can be dealt with in it's more of a mechanistic way as opposed to working through DNA and metagenetics and all that other stuff, which are incredibly complex. But for example, this one guy I talked to has He's working on a device that manages what happens when your main artery going down the center of your body becomes likely to rupture. And there have been historical ways of treating that involve opening up your whole body and long 6-month recoveries and stuff, moving toward arthroscopic approaches. And his approach was taking that arthroscopic approach and miniaturizing it further down and having recovery only be a few days as opposed to 6 months. And again, his background was mechanical engineering and fluid dynamics. And the body is a fluid dynamic environment. And the transition from one type of fluid dynamics to another is not that hard. And again, the capital requirements for a medical device, tend to be much smaller, and the approval life cycle through the FDA tends to be much shorter.
It can be. Yeah, and I didn't mention medical devices because it wasn't an area that the questioner asked about. But I agree. And to your point about the convergence of mechanical engineers and IT folks and so forth, there's actually some wonderful programs. There's a program at Stanford, I believe they call it BioX, that brings together folks from the engineering side and the business side and the medical side to try to get some of these companies going. I'm familiar with that one because I'm actually on the board of a medical device company now that was started by a guy who came from that program. There are similar programs I know at other universities, MIT back east and some other, I think Berkeley has some similar activities, UC Berkeley, and yes, I completely agree. There are some excellent opportunities in that arena.
And let me just add one thing here. My good friend, venture capitalist Evgeny Zaitsev, that many of you may have met already, is a VC in the biotech area. And when we talk and people ask him why biotech is important, the usual answer is that, look, everybody wants to live forever. That's why people are investing in biotech. And what Evgeny did is that he actually was able to somewhat circumvent the usual practice of biotech companies requiring hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of investment. He, instead of buying all of this, he founded a company that was developing a particular molecule. This company was headed by Valeria Sovskaya. You may have met her as well here. So instead of buying all of this equipment, he came up with a very, very simple cloud idea. Rent this equipment from universities at night. So he ended up putting in something like $60 million into the company, and in 3 years selling it for 560. Right? So what I'm like to point out here that there is enough room for cloud even in non-computing areas. There is plenty of opportunities that can be exploited without the need to drop major cash outside of the IT project.
So we've talked about, there was a question right here. Anya.
Okay, right there.
Yes, Slava, you started to talk about something interesting here. So we talked about technologies, but could you guys talk a little bit about the new business models that you see emerging in the valley? There's different way to skin a cat, and so I think that's as important as probably the technology. Second question is, if we have time, what did you see as a change, Bo and perhaps Art, in terms of the DNA of new entrepreneurs in the valley, the young folks, the 20-something, the Generation Y?
Sorry,
I didn't get it.
Did you repeat the second question?
The second question has to do with entrepreneurship. And what did you notice in the valley in terms of the DNA that new entrepreneurs have versus, what we've been used to see?
Yeah,
Okay, so
great
the
question.
question was around business models.
So
understanding
first
sort of
question,
innovative
business model,
models,
second
and then
question,
DNA of
entrepreneurship.
Entrepreneurs here versus elsewhere.
Okay.
Take the second one first. Well, somebody's thinking about an answer to the first question. Probably the harder one. My wife's an orthopedic surgeon, works for a large healthcare organization, and I got dragged as a trailing spouse now and then to some of her, her management meetings and so forth, leadership meetings. And I listened to an interesting presentation a couple years ago from one of these experts on the different generational effects and Generation X and Y and whatever we're up to now and the generational attitudes and so forth. And I don't poo-poo that stuff. I actually think it's quite interesting. But one thing that I think is pretty straightforward that sort of cuts across that is that I don't know, pick a time, 20 years ago and earlier, the only people who started companies were really incredibly fired up about some product that they were, or technology or something that they just had to get out there into the world, and that's all they thought about. Certainly the Valley is just full of examples of those kinds of people. And along the way, if they were successful doing it, they made very nice money, thank you very much. But there just wasn't very much focus on liquidity or how to get to the maximum exit value or any of that kind of stuff. Nowadays, we still have a number of those people. In fact, I don't think any fewer than we used to have. But there are a larger number of people who've entered our world who are upfront focused on how am I going to make a lot of money and get the quickest exit I can at the highest value that I possibly can and so forth. And quite honestly, I think that that's not all that helpful. I think that it really gets in your way of building a great business or even one that ultimately will make you some money. So that's one thing that I've noticed. The second thing is that this really came as quite a wake-up call to me at some years back. It's just become truly, it's a cliche, but it's true, a totally globalized, multicultural, environment. And, when I grew up in the business, we were all pretty homogeneous, certain kind of people, certain kind of education, mostly homegrown here in the, U.S., working in these young companies. And now, the last several companies that I've been CEO of, all the founders, were born in other countries. And mostly had at least their undergraduate educations in other countries and then came here for their graduate educations. My last company, I was CEO for 5 years. Our first markets were in China and Korea.
I've been essentially as a corporate, technology scouting. I was buying startups with Symantec, and I saw tremendous number of startups. And one thing that I can tell you guys is that it's a secret that I was using, secret sauce, how to determine a good company. If people, the founders that come to pitch their company, came to Symantec and they had dollar signs in their eyes, I would blackball them. If they were passionate about their product, then I would talk to them. Startups work because people in them care about what they do. Otherwise, it's just a job. So that's what makes it interesting for me, and that's what makes a great startup. And
Sam, you were going to mention something?
Yeah, I was just going to pile onto your comment. Very related to the type of employees that we're all hiring, and that whether the founders or the teams you're growing, that shift to virtual teams in the last 10 years when I started 10 years ago, you pretty much had your entire team local. It was just starting to move to outsourcing internationally, but it's gone a step further than that now. Probably 3 out of my 8 meetings a day, unfortunately, 8 meetings a day that is, are on Cisco telepresence or virtual experiences where I'm interacting with teams of people over the computer in a very virtual way. And if you think about the younger culture today that's coming up, that's in high school, in college, in undergraduate, et cetera, they've grown up in a world where they're used to communicating that way. So they're much more better armed than myself having to convert that way. So I think that's a big positive the younger generation will have, is they're used to communicating with wide groups, whether it's over the Xbox or over Facebook or over Twitter or other social media mechanisms. That's an advantage that they're going to be able to carry on as they go forward, and they'll be much more comfortable coming into a world where the day of having your entire team, nevertheless the entire company in the same room, those are just gone and will never be back.
Yeah, I'll take a crack at the new business model since nobody's moved in that direction.
Virtual teams, that's
Well,
part
we
of it,
will.
right?
There you go.
Well, that's a new business model? Yeah. Okay, sorry. I was thinking and not listening.
Let me just comment on new business models before. I'm not as eloquent as you, therefore I would basically have you conclude that. But in terms of new business model, the company that I work for is one of the portfolio companies of Oxygen Capital. Oxygen has solutions for insurance industry. And as it happened, insurance industry managed to skip several generations of IT upgrades. They had tons of cash to back up their policies. They put it into the money markets, and thank you, 2% out of $1 billion is a ton of money. So when the money markets dropped, they turned around and saw a lot of people crowding in this area, people with advanced IT solutions, so you can get insurance policy in 5 minutes without even talking to anyone. And therefore, they were under pressure. They are under pressure to transform their business, but some of the companies decided to pay, certain large consulting organizations a lot of money, and ended up throwing the results away. And the reason for that is it's very hard to manage large projects. So the decision to upgrade the core product for insurance industry can be a career-ending move for CEO. On the other hand, they have to do it. So what Oxygen did in that model is they came up with an alternative solution, which is not charging people for professional services time and huge license fees, etc., but rather saying, look, pay for our travel, just, less than $1 million, which is a really small amount of money if you consider, a few hundred people working on the project. And then we'll charge the insurance company 1% of the total revenue booked on the insurance system. And that's a good model for insurance companies because they already have a lot of the agents, freelancers, that are paid commission on the deals. So, and that's what makes us successful. We eliminate the risk for insurance companies. And at the same time, everybody's interested in putting as much revenue through the system as they can. So I'm trying to say that there are few business models that emerged as a result of the changes in the market. It's not just subscription model, it's not just per user or per installation fee. There is plenty of people experimenting with business models, and some of them turn out to be better than others.
So, Bo, do you have anything to add to that? We have about 10 minutes, so I got a couple more questions I wanted to address, but go ahead if you want to talk about that.
Okay, I was just going to very quickly, I mentioned those 4 trends: social, globe, cloud, analytics, and mobile. One of the things that we're trying to figure out, and clients are beginning to ask us, is, gee, these are 4 really big disruptive things happening all at the same time. What do they mean all together? How do I deal with them all together? Increasingly what we're seeing is the realization by companies beyond the usual suspects, beyond Microsoft and Apple in particular, just generic industrial companies, that their products are increasingly have microprocessor capabilities and could have networking capabilities, which moves you into this concept of the Internet of Things you probably heard about. But the more fundamental business model opportunity here is what are the opportunities to create sort of the equivalent of app stores or an ecosystem of extenders of your capabilities on if you're just a light bulb maker, or if you're an engine maker, or if you're pursuing if you're a legal firm or whatever. We think that's a big opportunity for extending the business models in new directions, because the world itself is becoming completely digital. Probably the best way to think about this is how you increasingly, when you interact with companies that you've bought something from, that you expect to have a persistent digital relationship with the vendor of whatever it is you bought that thing from. You know, if you bought a washing machine, if you bought a water heater and you're a little confused, you expect to be able to find information to help you install it or help you use it or deal with a problem you run into right online or through a chat session or whatever. And when you don't find, that expectation isn't met, those companies become less valuable to you. And I think going forward, that business model is going to be the dominant business model for all companies.
Great, thank you.
You said about mobile, cloud, and social technologies. And what do you think about collaboration of these technologies and digital content market? What main trends and opportunities will be in the nearest future for entrepreneurs?
Yeah, it's a good question. And in fact, we interviewed one of the leading media companies just yesterday about this trend. And they're sort of on the leading edge, I think, of where this is all going. And I think it has a lot to do with semantic technology, that companies that have lots of content have had sort of static taxonomies of what's in their content stores. It's not expressed in a way that's flexible or agile, so there'll be lots of useful content that might be inside of an article or something about X, Y, and Z, but it's only categorized under X, for example. So that's one side of this. The other side of it is everybody who comes to your website seeking information, reading information, commenting on that information, sharing it, they're telling you as the content owner more and more about themselves. And companies, this company is beginning to create a semantic structure, RDF technologies, if you want to get technical. Semantic web is the higher level rubric here, that capture the information about each individual person who comes to their website. And the solution they're moving towards is that the content store and the person meet in the middle using semantic bridges, so that they experience the content on the site in the ways, it's organized in a way that makes the most sense to the individual. So no two individuals would see the same main website. They wouldn't even start in the same place. They'd start in a place that characterizes the world that they experience in the terminology and in the sort of the most important topics that they as individuals have already indicated to the website. That's how they see the world. I think that's sort of where we're going with all of this.
So a question I'd like to wrap up on, we just have a few more minutes. Oftentimes as entrepreneurs, as investors, it may be a great technology, a really whiz-bang product and all that kind of stuff, or the business model may be interesting, you think it's right, but all of a sudden you get in the market and something doesn't work. And more often than not, it doesn't work. So, and it seems to me a lot of this is about getting the market right, getting the timing right. So you can be, really far ahead, and we've seen this over and over. I think when I was at Alloy and you were one of our CEOs, we saw this a lot with our portfolio companies, where they really had some great technology, but they were so far out in advance of the market that they were way too early. And then you find other things that, people sort of jump into things. Nowadays, I've heard a lot of investors say, well, I've got to be investing in another consumer company because my LPs are sort of forcing us to do that. So you wonder if they're too late. And so getting that market timing right, sort of right in the middle where that wave is sort of pushing you in. My question to the panel is, when do you know the timing is right? And what are some of the signs that you may be able to see from customers, from partners, from the ecosystem in general that sort of will point you in the right direction versus having to either close shop or return money to your investors?
I'll give you a real quick, since you refer to the, our mutual days in the alloy world. I'll just give you a real quick shot at a partial answer. There's a lot of classic marketing stuff out there that you can read, and I don't think we can do much justice to in a 2-minute summary on, how do you read your market, and so on and so forth. But I think there's another aspect, to it, which is that if you're able to respond to that market, the timing may not be right for exactly what you thought you were going to do, but it may be right for something very close to it that you can do. And I just don't you can read all the classic marketing stuff, but I don't think there's any substitute for listening to your customers, which is part of why I like B2B kinds of things, because I can sit down across the table and talk to my customers, as opposed to consumer markets where you got it's harder to gauge consumer sentiment. We were actually one of the portfolio companies that Alloy had, this company being referred to as Farsight, where our product was just way too early. We started out we were going to offer a software product, but the need was real. So what did we do? We packaged it as a service, and provided as a service to our customers who were large drug companies. And eventually, by the way, by the time we sold the company a few years ago, software sales had overtaken consulting sales for revenue and were the lion's share of the company's profits, but that took a decade. For the first handful of years, what paid the bills was we packaged it as a service, which our customers were willing to accept and pay for. They just weren't really ready to buy the software and learn how to use it and pay except for the deployment expenses and so forth themselves. So just one example. But I think there are two sides to the coin. No substitute for listening to the customers, but one part of it is figure out, are they ready for what you thought you were going to sell them? But the other side of that coin is, what are they ready for right now that's closely related to what you thought you were going to sell? And can you turn around and provide that?
I would say on the consumer side, I think if you want an example of a company that really understands this and has operationalized it from an analytics and a big data perspective, it's Zynga. Everything they do is about analytics. Every change they make to their offerings and their capabilities is measured around a set of core goals and targets that the analytics inform. If they make the change in the function, do people stay longer? Do they buy and trade credits more? Everything is measured. So in some sense, the big data and the analytics side of the world is opening up a way to evolve a company where you basically just get started. And you can think of it as the old way of doing things was stick your car out there without any headlights and hope that they stay on the road. And if they do, they're successful at the end of the day. Today, with these new capabilities, at least in the consumer space, they actually have headlights on. And if the road's curving, they can actually take it. But if they have to turn the headlights on.
One of the comments that I would like to make is in terms of answering to the question of market. I noticed, particularly in the Russian startup area, there is certain, let me put it this way, disdain for marketing people. That's wrong, guys, seriously. Before you go and start designing the product, the first person that a technical team must talk to is a marketing person who knows the market in a particular country that you're trying to bring service to. I've had literally hundreds of startups coming up with a smart gizmo and showing it to me and saying, this is cool gizmo. I say, yes, how are you going to sell it? It's going to sell itself because it's so cool. And it doesn't work this way. There is a good word or combination of words in English language, a solution looking for a problem, right? Unfortunately, way too many startups are founded by people that are extremely passionate about technology, but neglect the market analysis. Therefore, doing complete face palm, basically they cannot sell the product. And therefore, what I really advise you to do, if you don't have a marketing person, get yourself a smart marketing advisor on your advisory board. Somebody who knows the market. Without that, trying to develop a product would end up with, well, disaster.
I think, Slava, that's a great way to end it, because that was also our experience at Quick when we ended up selling the company to Skype. A lot of it was really because, not only because of the great product that they had, but all the relationships they had with the carriers and all the business development, sales, and marketing efforts that were put in the company around a great technology. So I wholeheartedly support that, and hope that the Russian entrepreneurs and CIS entrepreneurs out there sort of see this, and really that part of what is interesting here is one of the reasons we're here is to create these bridges between Russia, other countries in the CIS, and Silicon Valley. So definitely take advantage of that while you're here and create those bridges going forward. Thank you very much.